Greetings, everyone. I'm excited to welcome David DeWolf, President and CEO at Knownwell. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ben, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here. Let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so historically, I was an engineer at the beginning of my career. And about, 17, 18 years ago now, started a company called Three Pillar Global. And we are a digital product development company. And did that for 16 and a half years, led that company, grew it to just shy of about 200 million of revenue. 2,500 employees around the globe, did a couple of private equity exits, just had an incredible run, learned a ton, decided to step down, take a little bit of a break, refresh, recharge. And then this past September, launched Knownwell and super excited about what we're building, really diving headfirst into the enterprise AI space, working with professional service organizations to reinvent the way that they are institutionalizing their client intelligence and driving their client growth and client retention. So that's just the short snippet of what we're up to and what we're about.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that, but that's quite a journey. So 17 or yeah, 17, 16 years growing the previous company. Now, how much of a break did you need between that and then starting your next venture? A couple months,
Yeah.
years?
Yeah, it's the cliche. Everybody says, "Oh, you won't last." I didn't last. I took the first quarter of 2023 off, totally checked out, traveled the world. By the end of that quarter, I was getting itchy, so I ramped up a couple board seats, I ramped up some consulting, and by the end of the second quarter, I realized that wasn't enough. I'm an operator. So it was just about 9 months. September 5th is when I formally launched Knownwell. Probably about 3 months before that, I started doing a ton of customer interviews and just talking to folks, trying to figure out where in this space we were going to be. So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You hear that a lot. Just can't stay away. So a little bit break to
No,
recharge.
when
So
you're built for something, you're built for something. When you love it, you love it, you know?
that's great.
Mm.
Well, let's talk about your current venture, Knownwell.
Uh-huh.
So tell us what products and their services does Knownwell offer?
Yeah, so Knownwell is a SaaS platform. It's actually what we're calling an AI as a service platform. We're trying to reinvent some of the fundamental challenges with SaaS, but you can think of it as a SaaS platform. And specifically, we are working with B2B service companies, right? So think about technology services, marketing services, finance and accounting services, any functional business service really struggles because unlike a SaaS company, unlike a retail company, they don't have the transactional data that is so rich that allows them to operate that operating machine that we just love that scales so well. And this is fundamentally because there aren't transactions in those businesses. It's relationships. So the only transaction you may have is an MSA or an SOW, right? But there is so much rich information that gets lost in the nuance of the conversation. And so we are taking those conversations, think emails, Slack channels, video call recordings, synthesizing it with the structured data, with publicly available information, training models on it, and really helping organizations to get to know their clients really well and create that operating data that says, here's what you need to do to drive your metrics so that we can start to run service businesses like we run today, a SaaS business, a retail business, right? That operating machine that can help you to scale.
Oh, that's great. I may need to become a customer. So targeting B2B service companies, and
Mhm.
what is the ICP for this? Is it, I mean, do you have any sort of sweet spot revenue
Yep.
range, or really anyone who's running a B2B service company can
Yeah, I mean,
hop on board?
ultimately, it will become anybody in services, but as you know, focus is so important early on. And so we're really targeting the middle market to get going out of the gate. We're targeting the lower middle market. I would call it 25 million to $250 million companies starting off with. Ultimately, we think our sweet spot will settle in more in the middle market, the upper middle market, kind of think 100 million to 2 billion in revenue and ultimately yes to the enterprise and everything else, but we're really focused on that middle market now where we think we can have a huge impact because you just don't have the operating maturity or the resources to create it as you navigate scale because of the fundamental operating model and the business model in that those businesses. So we think there's a great opportunity there to reinvent it, especially as this AI wave is hitting services in a unique way, right? Really digitizing knowledge for the first time. They've got to be looking for how do we really transform our business.
Okay, and I think you mentioned this before with services business. This it could be a huge accounting firm or a
Mhm.
HVAC service provider. Does it kind of matter if it's kind of a
Yeah,
knowledge service or hands-on service?
We are very focused on the knowledge service businesses. We have found several corollaries where it does resonate in other adjacent spaces, but we are very focused on especially recurring revenue services businesses. So think traditional BPOs, outsourcing full functions, critical part of a marketing team. Think a PR agency as an example, right? You're on retainer and you're a key part of that extended team. Or in technology services, you have a lot of organizations that are a managed service provider or a product development partner, or those types of organizations that are a key part of that ongoing operating team. Same thing with outsourced in your space, right? Outsourced CFO, outsourced, finance and accounting departments. Those types of things are really the perfect fit when you're doing both knowledge work and you're then have that recurring revenue model that is so important to the scale and growth of the business.
Okay, love it. Appreciate that insight. So yeah, really interesting. And so you said you founded the company about
Mhm.
September of last year, so
That's
September of
right.
2023.
Yep.
And yep. And do you guys have a HQ location or are you working virtual?
Yeah, we are all virtual at this point in time. Headquarters is officially in Virginia, but only because I happen to live here. So
Yeah, makes sense. And then what about your team size? How many staff right now?
yeah, we've got 14 folks so far. 5 of those are part-time and contractors, but very quickly scaling and flipping. So we'll probably end the year around 20 folks.
Okay. And then you're at 20. And then so you just started out. So are you pre-revenue? Are you generating revenue now?
We are all but pre-revenue. We're just on the other side of it. So we formally drop our MVP pilot on April 1st and of 24 here. And so it's right around the corner. We do have a handful of beta customers that are paid beta customers that are just waiting for that to go. So, once that drops, we will be post revenue, but we're just at the beginning of that cycle.
Interesting. So paid beta customers coming up,
Yep.
about to drop that. You hear a lot of things, build your audience, do this,
Yeah.
get people to pay and then deliver the product. So tell us, how did that process work? I mean, you have a
Yep.
long history in product development,
Yep.
that you're about to drop this MVP, but you already have folks signed up as beta customers. So tell us how
Yep.
that worked.
Yeah, so it's funny. I find that the market talks a lot about being customer driven, but we don't actually execute on it. I mean, if you even go look at what everybody says about the different funding cycles, right? Your seed round is really supposed to be about, that technology getting in market, and that's before anything commercial. We've thrown that playbook out the window and we've said the opposite. We said we have to be customer led, and that is so critical to the success. And so we launched in September 5th with an idea that there was an opportunity to really focus on enterprise AI adoption. That everybody was talking about these productivity tools, but nobody was talking about how are we going to change the way business operates? What's going to happen to the jobs? How's it going to impact leaders and managers, not the line workers? And so that's where we were focused first. And we went out really starting in July, even before we launched the company, just interviewing people. And so we sat in a bunch of boardrooms, talked to a bunch of board members. We talked about to C-suite. I've always found that you follow the money. So did a lot of conversations with investors, talking about where are they deploying their capital, what's happening in their portfolio companies. And from that began to really identify this space and started first by recognizing the problem we kept on hearing about. And the problem was multifaceted, but number one, the executives in middle market businesses have what we're calling this data paradox. On one hand, they will say, and the research actually shows, Oracle just did a research report at the end of last year on the overwhelming nature of data. It's actually undermining decision making. Yet at the same time, these same leaders will tell you that they don't have the right data and the right intelligence to make better decisions. So it's like, I've got too much, but I don't have enough at the same time. So this paradox is real. We heard that over and over again. We heard that organizations don't have a vision for how AI can reinvent their business. And we also heard what seemed to be totally unrelated until we connected the dots of all these organizations are really struggling with client churn first and foremost, and secondly with client growth. And it comes back to really not knowing their clients. And as we poked into those three things and began to kind of feel out and paint a vision for it, what we found was that especially in professional services, where we saw the strongest signal here that the reason client churn is not only impacting companies but surprising them is because they don't have the intelligence. They don't actually know. And it goes back to the first problem. They're looking at all the easy data to look at. They're looking at the transactional data that doesn't actually matter in services. What matters is, what are people saying in this many to many relationship between the service provider and the client? And how do you distill that into intelligence that can actually improve operations? So as we discovered that, we began to go validate that problem, saw it in spades, ultimately began testing out solutions for how would we solve it. And from the point of identifying this pain point on October 6th, so a month after we launched, to our first contract was about 5 weeks. We had a beta customer say, hey, we've got high churn. We're looking for, how do we transform our business with AI? We want to co-develop this with you. And that was the sign we needed to double down. We started hiring our technology team at that point in time, brought in our VP of engineering, and started sprinting. And since then, we've been out really refining that product vision, talking to more and more customers, ramping up a pipeline, and really making sure that we're being customer led and we're building the product based on what our paying customers and very real prospects are telling us is important to them to solve their pain.
So it sounds like through all these conversations, discoveries, investors, portcos, that through those that you made those contacts that then you could land these paid by beta customers.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what's fascinating. We took such a customer focused approach that one of the first things we did was launch a podcast and said, hey, that marketing was going to be a big part of what we did. And we did that because we think this enterprise AI space is wide open. And so we wanted to plant a flag. Our first beta customer was actually an inbound lead from the podcast. So yes, from networking, absolutely a lot of the conversations, but a shocking point, like rarely is a cold lead inbound the way you bootstrap a company, right?
That's awesome. Some validation for podcasts, because you hear like, hey, podcast long-term, long-run game, but
Yep.
that's fascinating to
I think
hear.
it is a long-term bet, but this one turned short-term pretty quickly
Yeah,
for
real
us. So
fast.
I love it.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So let's switch to the fundraising side. So you've raised
Yep.
some capital. Looks like
Mhm.
2 million pre-seed round.
Yep. That's right. Mhm.
Okay. And tell us about a bit about that journey. I saw through the press release that maybe that funding was used to then kick off product development. So what
Mhm.
was that trigger? Why did you need that seed round or pre-seed?
Yeah, I mean, really, this came from being in market, and what I continually heard was that there was so much pent-up capital looking to invest in enterprise AI, but they couldn't find it. And with the amount of money going into this space, with the cost of training these models, I knew that it was important to make sure we started that journey and we filled the coffers, right? Nobody wants to give you money when you need it. They always want to give you money when you don't need it. So when I had a handful of folks reach out to me in a few week period of time and say, hey, we love what you're doing. We'd really love to be involved. I decided at that point in time, you know what, let's do this. Let's go ahead. We had some larger offers. We actually said, let's a modest amount of money to start off. Let's get product to market. And then we'll go out and raise once we have a few more proof points, but we're going to start the journey now.
Okay. And did your background help you in this process?
Oh, no doubt about
Having
it.
scaled the company,
Yeah.
exited.
Yeah. When you return capital to investors, right, you have lived through a life cycle that a lot of people haven't been fortunate enough to live through. And I've been fortunate to, raise a lot of money and return a lot of money and have a good track record there. I mean, as an investor myself, I look for three things, and this is
Mhm.
traditionally what everybody will tell you, right? You look for a huge target market, you look for a great management team, and you look for a business model, right? Those are the fundamental things. And at this phase, I think you look at a market that isn't validated and you look more than anything at the team. And so my background helped me, but I also think the team that I surrounded myself with, my chief product and technology officer has done 5 different startups and scale ups and had 4 different successful exits, right? So I don't think it's just about me, but it definitely doesn't hurt that I've returned multiples of capital.
Yeah, makes sense. And so so you've got tons of experience here. And for other founders who are considering a pre-seed round where the seed, sometimes you have a little product, a little
Mhm.
MVP, and then some seed capital on top. Sometimes like, hey, we need a seed round to actually because we got a complex product we have to develop and we can't just
Right.
bootstrap that.
Right.
So any lessons that you'd like to share with founders who may be thinking about they've got the concept, but it
Mhm.
requires that either seed or pre-seed investment to actually kick off their startup?
Yeah, you know what? What I think a lot of people miss because, hey, we've got to have a technology that we can then go out and test and sell is that customer feedback, right? If we go all the way back, everybody likes to talk about the lean startup and an MVP and all these things. If you go read the book, it's actually about napkin drawings, right? And so I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be awesome at painting a vision of what you're building and navigating that vision and refining it over and over again. And through that process, collecting tons and tons and tons of feedback, right? And so we were able to raise our capital and gain a whole bunch of momentum without a product. We still don't have product in market. In fact, we had our first paid beta customer before we wrote a line of code, before we had anybody hands-on keyboard writing code on staff, right? And it was because we were out literally talking. At this point, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of executives and board members about what they're facing. I knew intimately the pain point, and I had tested the hypothesis of multiple solutions. And I think if entrepreneurs can get better at actually getting themselves out in market and collecting rich feedback where they know their market, they know the pain, and they know their solution, and their solution's gone through multiple pivot points to get to that point before they even start building, then now you're just talking about building against a vision that you've already validated to some degree.
And how important as you're building towards the vision of this MVP to release the product roadmap so you don't go astray, where you start bringing in things where you think that may be a good idea. So how do you keep control over that product roadmap so you stay on track and can deliver that beta on April 1st?
Yeah. So it's one of the dichotomies of leadership when you're an entrepreneur because focus matters so much. You have to know what to say no to. At the same time, you have to be incredibly flexible in listening to the market and navigating, right? So the way I like to describe this is you want to be stubborn about your vision, but you want to be incredibly flexible about your plan. And so you don't begin to become bespoke and build anything for everybody, right? So for us, we've put a couple of staples in the ground. We've said, hey, we are going to build what we're calling an intelligent operating system. We're going to be all about understanding all of this nuanced data from natural information flows in communications. That's going to be our core competency. And we're going to turn it into actionable, high leverage decision making that helps leaders to orchestrate a business. And then we said, you know what? That's most relevant in broadly the professional services sector, which is a $3 trillion sector. Right. So we started planting flags, and those have gotten more narrow over time as we validate it. Right. So professional services then became B2B services, functional services. Then B2B functional services became some examples of technology services, marketing services, finance services, and we kept on narrowing that more and more. Now, at the point in time that we find one, you know what, that was the wrong bet. We need to undo that bet and say no to that and yes to something else. But we haven't given up on the big vision. We're pivoting along the way. Here's a great example. Early on, we were actually surprised. We didn't hear a lot of pushback on security. You would think here we are processing all of these conversations, security would have been big. And so we embedded some, foundations of security, and then we didn't move it forward at all. Waiting until we heard from the customer, all of a sudden we got far enough along in the buying cycles that it became relevant. We started hearing it. Well, it wasn't in our plan because we hadn't had any signals previously to mature security beyond what we thought was the baseline that we needed to. Well, here recently, we've adjusted the plan and said there's a new technical requirement earlier than we thought to ramp up security even more than we had originally planned. That is not changing our vision. That's not a lack of focus because we said no to security. No, we never just said no to security. What we've done is reprioritized, and we're navigating to make sure that the vision that we have, that we're incredibly stubborn about, is something that we hit. And I think that dichotomy is the hardest thing for entrepreneurs
Mhm.
because you have to be horribly stubborn. Everybody talks about the stubborn entrepreneur that won't give up even in the face of naysayers. but you have to be insanely humble and be able to listen at the same time and give up on the quote plan that I have to say, I need a new plan. The plan just evolved to get to where I want to go.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Appreciate that insight. So, David, at this stage of your business, right, just on the cusp of revenue generating, is there a success metric or number that you're focused on or using
Yeah.
to guide your business?
Yeah, there's a handful of them. So we've actually created a roadmap. I mean, early on, we've been really focusing on the marketing metrics, testing out a lot of messaging, looking at response rates, looking at call conversion. So even on kind of warm introductions, what is the response rate we're getting for taking a first call? How often does that first call go to a second call? Right. So we're starting to develop our pipeline metrics. That doesn't go all the way. I can't tell you a win rate yet. We don't have enough data points,
Yeah.
but we are absolutely, we have said this is the flow that we want to have. And we're measuring the key points along it that we have enough data to measure against. And every single month we're reviewing that operating cadence and adding one more metric, one more metric, one more metric. And then, a couple of times I've gotten ahead and said, you know what? That was the bad metric. I've got to undo it. We just don't have the data to measure that yet. Right. And so you've got to be flexible, right? You have a hypothesis of what you think you can measure next and you can't.
Okay, appreciate the insight. And I talk about that all the time. Yeah, there has to be enough data flowing through the business for certain metrics to make sense. So,
Totally.
yeah, I love that. So, David, appreciate your insight and experience today. And as we wrap up, tell us what's coming up next for the company.
Yeah, so we've got our initial pilot release coming out April 1st, and within a few months after that, we'll have our beta launching in the middle of the summer, where we'll continue to gain more traction. That's really our focal point. You can check out knownwell.com, but you can also check out, we've got an awesome podcast all about applying AI to business. It's called the AI Know-How. And it's another kind of interesting thing. We have all sorts of guests on there all the time talking about all these subjects we're tossing around.
Okay, perfect. So, listeners, if you'd like to learn more about what David's doing, check out knownwell.com. And what was the name of the podcast again?
The AI Know-How.
The AI Know-How. Perfect. Well, David, really appreciate you coming on today, sharing your experience and your journey. And yeah, thanks again.
I loved it. Had a lot of fun. Thanks, Ben.